So welcome, mothers and others. Today, I'm so excited that we are getting to meet Mike Collier. He is the Texas candidate for Lieutenant Governor. And so we get to have a few minutes to have some conversations and ask him some questions. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in our chat window. But we're just going to go right ahead and we're going to get started. So anyway, Mike, welcome to Mothers Against Greg Abbott. We're so happy that you're here with us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running to become the next Texas Lieutenant Governor?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Nancy. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm a big fan of your organization. It's a great source of pride for me to know that in our party, you have folks like you, Nancy, who create these organizations and attract all this attention. And that's how we're going to get this job done. So I'm just delighted to say a few words this morning. My name is Mike Collier, and I'm running for Lieutenant Governor, the President of the Senate. We'll talk a little bit, I think, about the powers of the Lieutenant Governor. I think it's a big and important part of my job to make sure folks understand when we think about the policies that we're really focused on, what's the Lieutenant Governor's role? And so the reason why I decided to run this race, it's a rematch. I ran against Dan Patrick 4 years ago. I think he's an absolute disaster for our state on so many levels. When I traveled around the state and I asked Texans, do you feel like we're better off now than we were 4 years ago or 8 years ago when he first became Lieutenant Governor? The answer is clearly it is not. Things are so wrong on so many levels. And I am quite determined to make sure that the next Lieutenant Governor is a Democrat. I haven't held office. I've just got angry enough to run and to fight for what I believe in. And remarkably, despite the fact that I've been doing this for 9 years, I'm not tired. With each passing day, I get more energized because of the importance. And we're 19 days away from the most important election cycle in our lifetimes. And I know I said that last time, but last time was the most important. And this one is the most important because things are getting worse. So that's what brings me to you today. And I'm just delighted to answer whatever questions you have.
Yeah. So thank you. Yeah, you're right. I think this election, especially here in Texas, is detrimental to democracy across the United States. I mean, so it is the most important election for Texans right now.
No question. No question.
Completely agree with you. So Mike, I used to be a Republican, and I remember when I interviewed you last fall. We had to sort of dig around whether or not you used to be a Republican. We had to do a lot of digging, actually, because we'd heard rumors that you're a Republican and you became a Democrat. We had to do a lot of digging to see, where you were. And we couldn't find much information. I have to tell you, we did digging. We could not find much. There were lots of things were scrubbed. So I was really surprised when I saw your latest ad where you came out and you said, I used to be a Republican. So let's talk about that, because I think that's something that we both have in common. We used to be Republicans. Obviously, the Republican Party left both of us behind.
Right.
But we also, I also like to think that we both have grown up and matured and have seen things differently to where, we have evolved, as I like to say. We have evolved in our thinking. So I like to talk to you about why did you leave the Republican Party? What brought you over? And so that's going to be the first thing. And then I have a follow-up question to that.
Yeah, certainly. Well, first of all, I'm sorry that it was difficult for you to find details. I actually wrote a book. On the subject, and the book is called Out of Control. I'm not promoting my book. I think it's unethical to use campaign resources and time to promote a book. Not everybody shares that point of view that it's unethical, but I have an over-the-top view of ethics because I'm a Pricewaterhouse retired PwC partner, and we're very into ethics. But since you asked the question, I wrote a book, and it's called Out of Control: A Converted Democrat's Improbable Quest to Save Texas Politics. And it's meant for the whole world to see sort of what my transition was. I think the reason perhaps that you had a hard time finding it is because it was a number of years ago, 10 years ago, was when I decided that I think I'm in the wrong place. I had been a Republican because everybody around me was Republican, in my industry, in my neighborhood, in my university. It's what you did, but they weren't right. I mean, I was a let me put it as bluntly as I can be. I was a pro-choice Republican. And if you read the book, you'll see that my start in politics was I was recruited by Republicans to run for the controller position in Houston. But they insisted you must be pro-life or we're not going to help you. And I said, well, I'm not. I'm pro-choice. And they said, well, that's okay. We can scrub that. We don't have to be honest. You know, you can lie about it. Literally, it's okay. Comptroller has nothing to do with a woman's right to choose. So all you have to do is lie about it. And I said, absolutely not. I won't do that. And that was the end of it for me. I was a pro-choice Republican. I was a pro-LGBT Republican. I mean, I hated racism as a Republican. I believed in public education as a Republican. And that party is not friendly to me at all. I mean, they just will have no time or interest in supporting me. Whereas the Democratic Party got behind me, and that was almost a decade ago. And it's been a decision that I made 10 years ago. It's been the best, other than marrying my wife of 33 years. That was the best decision I ever made. Second best decision I ever made was to fight with the Democrats, shoulder to shoulder. And I've been absolutely determined. And I'll say one other thing. I was watching politics unfold in Texas, and I didn't like the direction that we were going because Republicans never worried about Democrats in statewide contests. They only worried about their primary. And you could see that in these primary contests, it was always who could be further to the right. And they were getting further and further and further and further to the right. And I knew without a counterbalancing force, without a competitive Democratic Party, they'll just keep marching further and further to the right. And they'll take us someday to a place where we don't want to go. And so we have to start winning statewide races as Democrats. And I was right. I mean, I'm sad to say that I was right. They have taken us to a place that we don't want to go. For example, think about all the women who are going to die as a consequence of Dan Patrick's trigger law. And that's only one of many things that we can talk about. So I hold my head very high as somebody who was a Republican, but I've been fighting for a statewide Democratic victory now going on almost 10 years. And delighted, by the way, that when we think about what we stand for as Democrats, and I'm very pragmatic. I mean, I'm an accountant, right? So I solve problems and I think about the 5 or 6 things that the state does to influence Texans in their lives. And I have a point of view. It's a very pragmatic point of view. It's based on all the work, the studying that I've done. It's based on my values, but also talking to Texans. Things like public education, things like a grid that works, things like a tax system that doesn't rip us off, that also produces the revenue so that we can solve these problems that we have, like expanding Medicaid. Like protecting a woman's rights, like protecting the LGBT community's rights. That's what I believe in. That's what I'm passionate about. That's what Democrats believe in. And guess what? There are plenty of Republicans that agree with that too. And that's one of the reasons why I'm very enthused about all of the Republicans that I think are going to cross over and vote for us. And we should be very proud because they share our values.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've had a lot of Republicans recently that have coming out and they're voting for you. I mean, they're publicly voting in front of all of the Republican base to see, and they're publicly saying, like, listen, if we want to save Texas, you have to vote for Mike Collier. So that's been so exciting to see. So I wanted to hear from your point of view, how have you been working on developing those relationships, like with the Republicans? And as you're going out, you're campaigning all over Texas, including rural Texas. Do you think you'll make an impact with Republicans all over Texas, especially in rural Texas?
Well, I think so. I can tell you that my relationship with each of the endorsing individuals, only one of them did I know prior to this election cycle. That was Judge Glenn Whitley in Tarrant County. And the reason why I know Judge Whitley is because when I ran 4 years ago, I sat in his office and we talked about property taxes. And he's an accountant and I'm an accountant, and we speak the same language. And we sat there and we talked about how it's state fiscal policy that drives our property taxes up. And yet there's not enough money for the things that we need to do. So he and I had a great relationship as a result of that. I hadn't seen him since 2018, but we remembered those conversations. And things have only gotten worse. So when it came time to run this race, I went back to see him. Hello, Judge. And I told him, he agrees with me on these issues. And also, the other thing that's come up with Judge Whitley and myself in our conversation is local control. He's very passionate about letting your local elected officials do their jobs. And we've seen that, Dan Patrick with his culture wars, a lot of his culture wars is all about telling local officials what they can and cannot do, not letting them represent us. Judge Whitley's not happy about that either. So as a consequence of getting reacquainted and talking about property taxes and talking about local control, Judge Whitley, and I asked him if he would endorse me. He said, I don't think so. I'll have to think about it. Well, he surprised me. He did. I was one of the last to know. And of course, I was honored. But then friends of all of the others who've endorsed me, I had no relationship with them, but I knew people that knew them. And I know people that know people because I've been doing this for a long time. And I started getting phone calls. You ought to go call so-and-so. You ought to go call so-and-so. Sit down and have lunch with them or have dinner with them and talk about Texas politics. And lo and behold, those conversations were very, very productive. And they're all like, look, Mike, we're glad you're running and we're going to support you. And we're going to tell all of our friends. The one thing I hasten to point out, Nancy, is that we have only two things in common, really, that are powerful enough to produce these endorsements. One, we're all passionate. Every one of us are passionate about public education. No question about it. And the other is we're passionate about democracy and the real concern that democracy is failing in this state. What we haven't discussed is any other policy matter. It has never come up in these conversations. Now, they know where I stand. I've been true to myself and true to our principles now for the better part of a decade. They know where I stand, but never once has any policy disagreement ever come up in these endorsements. Nobody has said to me, in exchange for all the help I can give you, here's what I need out of you. That's never come up, with one exception. And it was Judge Whitley. And he said, all I ask in exchange for all the help I can give you is you must be a statesman, because this is all about solving our problem in politics. So, Nancy, I mean, it's a long answer, but I'm really quite pleased and proud. And I think we as Democrats ought to feel great.
I agree.
That folks are joining. So.
Yeah, I agree, because we're seeing a lot of that traction in Mothers Against Greg Abbott as well, where a lot of people who used to be Republicans are coming over, because at some point it's about saving our communities and helping out families. And there's a much bigger picture involved in being Texan, other than just like wagging your tail to the next culture issue that, somebody wants to bring up. Yeah. So there's a lot involved here. So you just brought up the thing on local control, and we have seen, let's talk about the power of the lieutenant governor, because what I have felt, and one of the reasons why we formed Mothers Against Greg Abbott, is too much power, too much control is now in the hands of the governor and the lieutenant governor and the attorney general, to the point that they are now going after their own Texas citizens, either at a personal level, city level, town level, where they're actually at war with other Texans. And it is, I've been living here in Austin since 1995, and I've never seen anything like it. Never like I have now, especially with this past, this current administration. So can you tell us a little bit more about the power of the lieutenant governor's office, what it entails, and what they're able to do, and how they've overstepped and they've taken too much power, and now no longer looks like the old Republican Party, which was more local control. They turned it up from like small government control to big government control.
Oh yeah. They aren't living up to any. They aren't living up to any value or principle that I recognize.
Absolutely.
Texas is somebody who cherishes democracy. No, in the Texas Constitution, the lieutenant governor is the president of the Senate, presides over the Senate. What does that mean? That means the lieutenant governor decides what bills get voted on. Lieutenant governor decides who sits on what committees, which is how bills are shaped, and as a consequence has tremendous influence on anything that comes out of the legislature, whether it's a legislative policy or whether it's a budget matter. The lieutenant governor has tremendous influence over that. But at the end of the day, the lieutenant governor presides over a Democratic body, and senators have to come in and do their job and represent their constituents' point of view. But a lieutenant governor also has a bully pulpit. And that's very, very important, because one of the problems that I see, you take Dan Patrick, for example, who I'm running against, He doesn't let senators work on fixing the grid. He doesn't let senators, in my opinion, deal honestly with education, with public education. He forces them to pursue his ideological agenda. And if you don't go along with him, he'll hurt you. And he'll run you off, run a primary opponent against you, strip you of your committee assignments. He does not want to hear your point of view unless your point of view is exactly his point of view. And that is wrong. In a democracy, it's wrong. For the state of Texas, it's wrong. And the fact his point of view is not our point of view as Texans. And that's the fundamental problem. And let's take an example. Let's take the trigger law. I didn't think, I'm not an attorney. I was hoping that Roe v. Wade would not be overturned, obviously. It is a vital constitutional right, in my opinion. For half a century, that a woman can make those decisions. She's the only one that can make those decisions. And that right was protected by the Constitution. I didn't think it would be overturned, but it was overturned. And guess what happens? This trigger law. Now, you know who? It's the most extreme policy that I think I have ever seen. It will cause women to die. It'll shatter families. It'll shatter individuals. That's the most extreme thing I've ever seen. And you know who's responsible for that? Dan Patrick, who, as in his power as lieutenant governor, made that bill happen over the objections of all the Democrats, and in my opinion, over the quiet objection of many Republicans. He demanded this. He used his power to take away women's rights. That's why you get rid of him, and now you have a lieutenant governor who believes in women and believes in rights and believes in individual liberty. We're going to do the exact opposite. Now the lieutenant governor will use that power to protect individual liberty and individual freedom. And that only the lieutenant governor can do that. Governor can't do it. Only the lieutenant governor can do it because it comes through the legislation. So it's an absolutely essential position.
Yeah, thank you. You're right. It is absolutely essential. And we're seeing a lot of things where it's like there are so many good bills that are happening in the Texas Ledge that never get to see the light of day because Dan Patrick chooses what bills get brought to the table.
Right.
And that's a problem. So lots of good things for Texans are not happening because he much rather choose a bill picking on trans children, not even like adult children, than he will about, passing bills to further have health care for Texans, which just drives me crazy.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, he absolutely needs to be gone. So let's talk about.
Another example. Take the grid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look what Dan Patrick has done. They're not talking about the grid. We have winter's coming. We almost didn't have enough power this summer. Next summer, we're in trouble because we're a growing state. Dan Patrick refuses to let the Senate do its job, refuses to have them work on fixing the grid. He took a campaign donor and put him on the ERCOT board. That should rattle everybody because now all of a sudden ERCOT is part of the propaganda machine. Think about it for a second. And then there was a report that was done on how do we fix the grid. That report has not seen the light of day. There were Senate committees that were scheduled to look at this report and think about fixing the grid. He canceled all of that because he refuses to talk about fixing the grid because he knows it's only going to create political problems because he's not going to fix the grid. And so that's, you think about the reasons to get rid of Dan Patrick and the power of the lieutenant governor. Imagine this. He's refusing to let the Senate work on fixing the grid, and the grid failed and killed people. And he's refusing to let the Senate do that work. I'm just incredulous and fired up to beat him.
Yeah, absolutely. We need you to beat him, Mike. We absolutely need you to beat him on absolutely every level. It's just too bad. So how many times did you ask him for a debate? And he has not agreed, right? He hasn't agreed to debate you.
Oh, well, I knew he wouldn't. I didn't ask him. I wasn't going to waste my time asking him. People that fail miserably don't debate. People that are cowards don't debate. But we have been invited by two or three, I can't remember. I want to say 2 reputable media outlets to come in and do a debate. And his answer is no. I think everybody should debate, but you can see why he wouldn't want to debate me. He's failed. Property taxes have exploded since he's burst on the scene as lieutenant governor. I don't think they've ever gone up any more than they have with him in charge. And it's state fiscal policy, and he's lying when he says it's not. The grid failed. He ignored warnings over a period of 10 years. Killed a lot of people. 65-70% of our teachers want out. They're thinking about doing something else because the public education system has been so neglected by our state leaders. And now this trigger law, where women's rights have been absolutely taken away from them. And how many are going to die? I'm not the least bit surprised. He has failed so miserably that he won't debate, and he's a coward too. He's a coward.
He's absolutely a coward. Well, that's something a lot of those Republicans have in common. Coward.
He's a coward.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about education and what your positions are on education, what you would do to support, especially public education. We have a common friend, Charlie Foster Johnson, is from Pastors for Children. It's a common friend of ours, and we're very pro public education around here. So supporting our teachers is the most important thing to us here at Mothers Against Greg Abbott, and making sure our public education is funded, and wanted to know what your position was and some of your proposed solutions for education.
I'm so glad you brought up education. I am pro public education, traditional public schools. I think if we don't get that right, we're not going to get anything right in Texas. I think we have a moral obligation to all of our young people, not just the sons and daughters of the well-to-do, to give them a fighting chance at success in life. It's good for them. It's good for their families. It's good for the state. And it was my passion for public education is the reason why I ran for statewide office in the first place. That was the triggering issue when I saw the direction Republicans were taking us. Not all Republicans. Let's be crystal clear about this. I mentioned all the Republicans that have endorsed me. They're all pro public education. It's the Dan Patrick wing of the party that want to kill public education. And I'm not overstating the case when I say that. I could see it coming. That was the proximate reason for me to jump in and basically set my career aside to do this. I'm passionate about public education. I think we ought to have the best public schools in the country. That's my goal. Now let's talk about how we get there. First of all, I had to be reminded that I taught when I was in my 20s. I taught trumpet lessons to junior high students. And it was so long ago that I hadn't thought even to mention it to anybody until we were passing by Henry Junior High in Austin, Texas. And I just said to the team that I was with, oh, by the way, that's where I used to teach. And my team was like, you never told us that you were a teacher. I taught junior high lessons. It's not the same as being in the classroom, although I know what it's like to be 23 years old and getting bullied by a seventh grader. It happened to me. It's hard work. But I haven't been a teacher. I trust teachers. I believe in them. Our teachers Suzanne and I have always been friends with our teachers and built relationships with them. They are our wives and husbands and brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews. That's who teachers are. And when I ask them, okay, what do we need to do to have great public schools? Here's what they tell me. They tell me we need smaller classes. Class sizes are too large. I can't do my job. I need more help with special education teachers, because if I have a big class and then I have somebody on the autism spectrum or a student who's dyslexic, I need help. And great public schools would provide that help. I'm told that we need more counselors. That a big part of the public safety equation, the school safety equation, is more counselors that can have, not counselors that aren't all tangled up with administering the test, which I'll talk about in a second, but counselors who are doing their job, building relationships with the students, keeping their eyes wide open, making sure that they're a big part of the safety equation is counselors. And then teachers say, we can't be teaching to the test. It's an absolute disaster. And by the way, you know who else tells me that? College professors and employers, because teaching to the test is causing critical thinking skills to decline. Pay needs to be better. We all know that our teachers are underpaid. No wonder, with such a hard job, they feel like they made a wrong career decision at the year 5, 6, 7. They have to count on their retirement. And Dan Patrick has made it very clear you can't count on your retirement. So these are the things that we need to do. And I think perhaps overarching all of that, Nancy, is, somebody who, in my professional life, I've had a hard job. I've had bosses. It's one thing to get up in the morning and go to a difficult job. It's quite another to think, and the boss just doesn't care about me. I mean, who wants that in their life? And you think about teachers, the message they get from Dan Patrick and so many others in charge, that they just don't care about you. They are condescending, they're impolite, they are not trustworthy, and they give teachers, and not just teachers, but support staff as well, very, very important to the success of a school. They give folks in the school this feeling that they just don't care. Tone at the top really, really matters. I know that from my business world. And I can tell you, you won't see a bigger difference between Dan Patrick, between any two candidates, and Dan Patrick, who's hostile to public education, who will never care, and Mike Collier, who is passionate about public education, who cares deeply for the parents, the students, teachers, support staff, all working together as a community to get a very, very important job done.
Amen, Mike. Amen. So one of the things that really gets on my nerves is when Republicans are always talking about like, oh, don't vote for Democrats because they're going to increase your property taxes. Well, my property taxes have gone up 36% since Greg Abbott has been in office. I calculated it last week. I was like kind of curious. So I went out there and said, since Greg Abbott's been in office, how much have these increases impacted our family's life? It's been a lot, 36%. I mean, that is a lot that has happened. So how do we explain the fact that, like, okay, if you see an increase in your property taxes, that isn't Democrats, that's Republicans. I mean, we need to own this talking point. So how do you talk about what we could do as far as property taxes and taxes to Texans? What should we be saying to them about property taxes and how it works, and how Republicans only increase their taxes and they do not decrease their taxes?
Well, you're exactly right. And you're exactly right. It is state fiscal policy led by Republicans that have caused our property taxes to explode. I think Dan Patrick is public enemy number one when it comes to exploding property taxes. He first got elected to the Senate saying, I'm going to bring your property taxes down. Then he got elected lieutenant governor. I'm going to bring your property taxes down. Then he gets reelected lieutenant governor. I'm going to bring your property taxes down. And guess what? Just look at your bill, folks. With Dan Patrick in charge, your property taxes explode. And a vote for Dan Patrick is a vote for higher property taxes. And it's worse than that. You're paying more and you're getting nothing for it. I'm going to say that again. You're paying higher taxes and you're getting nothing for it. And I'm going to explain how this works. I'm going to try to do it simply but powerfully. And I'm going to use public schools as the example, even though it's broader than that, because the same principle is at work when it comes to county and city governments and hospitals and the rest. But I'm just going to talk about public schools because it's the easiest to explain. It happens to be the biggest issue. Here's the way the budget's done, state budget. And remember that schools are funded, it's a joint venture between local and state. Local pays property taxes. State is not property taxes. State's everything but property taxes, okay? So the first order of business for the state is they say to themselves, okay, we are not going to increase funding for schools. Funding for schools is going to stay exactly where it is. Step one, once they made that decision. Step two, they send economists out and figure out how much more are your property values going to go up. Therefore, how much more are you going to pay in taxes? And if they're holding investment in public education still, then they say, how much less is the state going to put in? And so you find that there's no new spending, just higher taxes for homeowners, lower payments from the state. And they're shifting the burden. And it's basically one of the big drivers is the large corporations. They're shifting the burden from corporations onto the backs of homeowners. You as a homeowner are you're forced to pay more because the state is doing this to you, and you get nothing for it. Now, I've been talking about this for a decade, and nobody has said that I'm wrong, because I'm not wrong. This is exactly how this works. And the only thing Dan Patrick has to offer is to refuse to debate, because he knows that I'll call him out on his fraud, basically, and then allow this to continue to happen. And then he points the finger and he blames locals. It's the local leaders that are at fault. You go talk to the local leaders, and they'll tell you until we have an honest accounting on how those revenue pieces fit together, property taxes are going to keep going up. And the only conclusion you can draw about Dan Patrick is it will not be an honest accounting, and property taxes on his watch will keep going up, period.
Agreed. One of the best things I love about you is that of your background, your accounting background, your auditing background, and it is super important. This is one of the reasons why I want you elected into office, because we need to talk about the border. So the border's getting tons and tons of funding. I mean, Abbott's taking it from here, taking it from there. Do you believe that if you were to win lieutenant governor, would you propose doing some sort of checking of an audit on where the money is coming from to fund the border? Because lots of money is coming from all these other departments. And I'm worried because, I mean, he's obviously taking money out of departments where they desperately need that money. And it's at the point where it's coming in from so many departments. We don't even know how many departments it's coming in from. And he's getting the money from somewhere, and it should be going through the Texas legislature, but we see some of it going through, but not all of it going through. So I want to talk about border issues, the fact that Greg Abbott's taken a lot of money and putting it at the border for his political stunt, and what we could do about it and what you would do about it if you were elected into office, so we can check the records, because right now it's out of control spending.
Well, I'll start by saying we must have a safe and secure border, period. I have said that every time I've discussed this issue over the course of many years. And for Dan Patrick to suggest otherwise is just fraud. We must have a safe and secure border. And when I go to the border and I talk to folks, I talk to law enforcement, I talk to elected officials, I talk to community leaders, and I ask them, all this money that's being spent down here, what are we doing with it? Can anybody tell me what we're doing with it? And folks just look at you and they say, well, we really don't know. I mean, nobody knows what's happening at the border. The only thing we know, Nancy, is this. We have chaos at the border because we have incompetence in our top leadership in this state. Now, I come from the business world. How do we deal with these things in the business world? First of all, we define the problem. Then we work out the possible solution and the steps involved in solving it. And then we keep our stakeholders informed. You have milestones, you measure, you keep your stakeholders informed. In this case, voters are the stakeholders. I see none of that happening. Nothing. I have no idea how we've defined the problem. I have no idea how we've defined a solution to the problem. I have no idea how this money's being spent. You can't find out how the money's being spent. I think all that's happening are just really, really expensive stunts and gimmicks and nonsense. Nancy, and to drive the point home, if we had somebody who took a real, business executive's perspective on this and said, we're going to solve this problem and we're going to have a plan and we're going to have coordination with law enforcement. We're going to have the technology that we need. We're going to know where things need to be constructed, if that's what it takes. This is going to be our plan. We're going to, beef up in the ports of entry, because if that's where the fentanyl's coming, that's what we're going to do. If you have a real executive who said, okay, this is going to be our plan, and then this is how we're going to get the job done, it's quite possible that we need to spend more. I don't know. I mean, the fact is that we just don't know. And then the other question is, why in the world are we spending this money, and why aren't we a partner, a constructive partner with the federal government? I mean, are they calling the phone? Are they picking up the phone and calling the president, or are they playing politics with this? If I'm lieutenant governor, we'll make sure that we have a safe and secure border. We'll design the steps to achieve it. We'll keep stakeholders informed so that they know they're getting their money's worth and getting the job done. And I'll be on the phone with Washington, D.C. I don't care who, whether it's Republicans in charge or Democrats in charge. I'm going to be on the phone with Washington, D.C. every day of the week to make sure we're solving the problem. And I don't see Dan Patrick or Greg Abbott doing any of that. None of that, which is why I'm going to say it again. We have chaos at the border because we have incompetence at the top of our leadership in this state.
Yep. I agree with you 110% there. That was spot on. So one of our last questions here is probably our last question is guns and gun safety. And this is really important. It's on the top of minds of all the parents across Texas right now, especially after the Uvalde massacre. What is your position on gun safety? What could we be doing right now? And what would you do on gun safety if you were elected into office?
Yeah, well, it's a very important issue, and it's good that we're talking about it, Nancy. First of all, I was raised in a hunting culture. Doesn't surprise any of my fellow Texans. My father and grandfather and I would hunt. And of course, they're now, Grandpap's gone, Dad's old. I have all the shotguns and rifles and pistols that, we accumulated as a hunting family. and I have possession of them in a safe storage. And I was raised in a culture of gun safety. We talked about gun safety because guns are dangerous, and safety was a big part of our culture. I believe in gun safety. So what will we do about that? First of all, I have met with the families. It just breaks your heart to talk to them, but I've been to Uvalde, and I've sat and visited privately with several of the parents who've lost their beautiful young child. And they will tell you the most important thing is to raise the age from 18 to 21. And that's really quite logical. And of course we should do that. I think that's a very, very powerful, very important thing to do. I think we should also have a background check system that works. Our background check system doesn't work. I personally believe red flag laws would be very, very helpful. You got to have a judge involved. So this can't be some personal vendetta here where you're taking somebody's guns away because the Second Amendment is sacred. You have to have a judge involved. But I think red flag laws would be very, very helpful. Waiting period. So if you want to buy a gun, you have to wait a short period. These are the things that and Texans agree, by the way, Nancy, and what I say repeatedly on the campaign trail is doing nothing is not the right answer. Where we agree as Texans, we must act. We must act where we agree. And the things that I outlined are the things that I believe that Texans agree on because they are sensible, gun safety, perfectly consistent with the Second Amendment. And the majority of Texans are with me. And that's what I think we need to do, and we need to do that right away. I want to say one other thing. I know that parents are very concerned. Teachers are very, very concerned. Kids are very concerned. It just breaks your heart. When I was in school, I had to worry about whether or not I could get a date to the prom and whether or not I was going to get a good grade. I wasn't worried about being killed in my classroom. You just can't believe that our children are having to go through this. One thing I don't think is we say, well, let's just arm our teachers and everything will be just fine. That I do not support. I believe in local control and the specifics of whether teachers can or can't have a firearm. That's up to the local administration. But to say that that's all we have to do is arm our teachers is wrong. As one teacher said to me, what are we really saying? We're going to have a gunfight over the children's heads and hope the teacher doesn't get killed? That's not a good answer.
100%. I agree. I don't want teachers armed in schools. That doesn't make me feel safe for my children or for the students or other teachers at the schools, especially because I've actually been a parent at a school where a teacher has taken their own life. So sometimes are those situations in which teachers do also need mental health support. So we don't want to necessarily give them guns either. That's not a safe solution for anyone, So I agree with you there. So Mike, what can we do for you right now at this, at the final tail end of the race? What can we do? Where can we help you? What can we do to help you win this election on November 8th?
19 and 2/3 days, you're dealing with an accountant. People are going to start voting in just a handful of days. Thank you for asking that, Nancy. First order of business is please make a plan to vote. So if you're listening to this, make a plan to vote and make sure that you've talk to the folks in your life. And just in the first instance, make sure you have a plan to vote and get others around you to have a plan to vote. And then ask the people in your life to just think a little bit about who you're voting for. Just do your homework. That's very, very important. I don't really even think I need to spend more time campaigning about Collier versus Patrick, because if you do your homework, I personally think it's a really, really simple answer. Next, if you want to help, there are ways to help. You could go to my website and prowl around. You'll find ways to volunteer. So we have some folks that are making phone calls. We have some folks that are dropping off lit. You'll also find a place to donate if you care to. A big part of what we're going to do in the next 19 and 2/3 days is keep our TV commercials up and running, which seem to be having So those are the things you can do. And then if there's somebody in your neighborhood, give money to Mothers Against Greg Abbott, help Nancy do her thing. It all works. I mean, just do whatever feels right. Just all I would say is just put your shoulder to the wheel and push. It's been a long time Democrats have won, but if we all put our shoulder to the wheel and push, that wheel is going to start turning. I believe that it is turning.
Yeah, I agree. I believe it is turning too. We will be using Pastors for Children's latest ad, which goes after Dan Patrick. We will be using that for our texting campaign for education. So
Wonderful.
I'm really excited because that kind of further supports you and your cause, and hopefully we can get you elected, Mike. I mean, that's my hope. So, in case anybody is watching me right now, I have my Mike Collier t-shirt on, Fix the Damn Grid. Please go buy one. It's hilarious. I love it. It goes really, really well with your flannel shirt for the season. So just to let you know. Yeah, working that angle. And please go support Mike. Sign up. I mean, it'd be great if everybody who's a member of Mothers Against Greg Abbott this coming weekend, please go hit the ground. This is go time now. We need to go knock on doors. We need to sign up for the texting campaigns. We need to do everything we can to focus on getting out the vote. So please go and participate in democracy now by knocking on doors and supporting all of our candidates up and down the ballot, and our great candidate like Michael Collier, who's running for lieutenant governor. And so, Mike, I thank you so much for spending this time with us today and with me. And it's always so much fun to run into you on the campaign trail. I have such a hoot and holler with you. You and your team are fabulous. I love them. Shout out to Collier and Ollie. I love them. You guys are all great. So I cannot wait to see you when we have that big party.
Yeah, your innovative approach to saving Texas politics is fabulous.
Thank you.